I'm making a quick little video just kind of giving my thoughts on the controversy of the 2.2 physics change. Now, for those of you who don't know what's going on, I have a video right here that I highly recommend you check out. It explains on a technical level and admittedly very dry level, but a very technical level, what the refresh rate 240, 360 discrepancy stuff is and all that. Yeah, just watch the video. It would take way too long to explain here. But basically, the long and short of it is this game has had a bug pretty much since its inception. It was discovered in Update 1.9, and it started being taken advantage of in 2.1. And what that bug is you have a value called the ticks per second value, which is basically just how many movements happen in a second. It's hard to describe. Again, watch the video. Basically, that's been tied to your frame rate for the longest time. So if you change your refresh rate, your frame rate changes. If you change your frame rate, your physics change. And top players have been taking advantage of 360 hertz for the longest time, and it's been kind of a weird situation because there are levels on the top of the demon list now that can only be played on 360. Well, that's not necessarily true. If a top player really wanted to, I guarantee you they could beat some of the levels on the top of the list on 240, but as it currently stands, they can't be beaten. So, the controversy comes in with the fact that in 2.2, our physics are being locked to a rate of 240 ticks per second, or rather, a form of physics that feels like 240 ticks per second. It's probably going to be like a whole new set of physics entirely, but that's what Rob compared it to, so that's what we have to go off of. And the problem with these new physics is that, at least for the space of new players who, play stupidly hard levels, 240 hertz is just not doable for some of these high levels. And so a lot of people are very mad with the physics change. And I'm going to be honest, I think this is a very unreasonable thing to get angry about. So I get it, right? A lot of people put a lot of effort into this game and pushed it really high on high refresh rate, right? But the problem with 360 hertz is that, as I explained in that last video, the higher your TPS, the more you move in the span of a second, right? The problem with that is the more you move in the span of a second, the more the game has to calculate in a second. And the problem with that is the higher the physics, the worse the game will run. It's really hard to explain, but for those of you who have Mega Hack and want to see what I mean, just start playing levels on higher and higher refresh rates and watch your frame rate start to fluctuate more. Go to like 240, then 360, then maybe 480, then 500, then 720, then 1000, and just keep going up like that. And you'll see the game just slowly become more and more unstable. According to both RobTop and Viprin, and mind you, the information on this is really weird and hush-hush, but from the information that has been given to the public, from what we understand, 240 is actually being chosen because 360 would make the game's performance way too unstable on certain devices. This is being picked to create a form of unity so that everyone can enjoy the game. And the problem with being mad about the handicap that's applied to top players is you have to think about this from a logistics standpoint. Yes, locking everyone on 240 hurts the top player base, but the top player base is small when compared to the entirety of the game's player base. You have to really consider that most of the people who play this game play it casually and for fun, and if you cater too much to, like, the top playing community, it can negatively affect the experience of the rest of the player base. And so when Rob makes the decision of what he has to do with this game, he has to make the difficult decision of, who do I cater to? And that ends up being an even more important question of, who is my largest audience here? And it just so happens that if he locks everyone on 240, that benefits everyone en masse. And while it does screw over list players to a little bit of an extent, you're telling me that you can't just, go on 240, practice a bit, and try to improve at 240 hertz until you can beat these levels? I highly doubt going down a couple refresh rates is going to lower the skill ceiling that much. It'll make stuff like frame perfects harder, and it'll make the game more difficult, yes, but not to the extent where our top one is impossible. I can sum up a lot of my issues with this being a controversy with Localizer's document. Localizer's document, which apparently it took 3 people to write 1.5 pages of what is essentially an opinion, why did it take so many people to write this? It's very flawed and shows a lot of the lack of understanding from the top player community when it comes to the situation. In this document, they spend a lot of time talking about the fact that RobTop has been rating levels that were verified on 360 for a long time, and that means that RobTop has endorsed the frame rate. But no, that doesn't mean RobTop has endorsed the frame rate, that means he's a good dev. The problem with not allowing 360Hz completions on the current version of the game is that you can play on 360 via legitimate means. If you go out and buy a 500Hz monitor right now and verify a level on 500, that would not be cheating. The frame rate restriction in general is defined by the Demons List, which, regardless of what you think, the Demons List is not official and does not get to pick the rules for this community. The 360Hz restriction has always been arbitrary and based off of, albeit the very sound logic of 360 is the most realistic monitor you could probably buy, that's high-end. The point still stands that if you go and buy a 500Hz monitor and use it to beat a level, you're not cheating. And so it would be very, very weird for people to be leaderboard banned and for people to not have their levels rated if they were playing on 360. And you know for a fact that if RobTop refused to rate a level just because of the hardware it was verified on, that would easily cause a controversy. Another issue I have with this is the idea that it's too late to change the physics and restrict them. I'll just read an excerpt now. The issue with removing 360 from the game is that it's too late to do so. It has already raised the skills gap by a tremendous amount, and levels of previously unseen difficulty now dominate the Demon List. Handicapping all players to 240 after these levels have already been rated and placed on the list will create a very awkward situation. Not a single level in the top 10 was verified on 240, and the highest level with a 240Hz Victor is Codependence at number 8. Nothing above Codependence has been beaten on 240 or lower, and there is a very good reason for this. These levels are simply too hard. Once 2.2 comes out, they will no longer be reasonable for players to beat. At least not without investing a ridiculous amount of time into them. You could argue that players simply need to get better and adapt, but there is a limit to how far skill can take you without the benefit of 360, and I'm sure most players can attest to this. The problem I have with this is that this is applying an old change that we've known about for years to the current Demon List, and I kind of feel like that's unfair. I'm gonna say something a bit controversial and say that this is actually the top player community's fault. The thing about the physics change controversy is that everyone's acting like we found out about the physics change recently. After all, the controversy blew up in the wake of 2.2 being about to release. The problem with this is that we've known about the physics change since around 2019. I'll put up some screenshots now of RobTop in the Discord explaining the physics change all the way back in 2019 and 2020. So let's go to the Demon List and use the Time Machine feature to see what the Demon List looked like back when we found out about this change. Now, I'm going to be generous and put us in March 1st of 2021, giving it a full year for people to properly adapt to and prepare for the physics change. Back then, our top 10 looked like this. Tartarus, the Golden, Zodiac, Kinos, Crimson Planet, The Rupture, Renovant, Thinking Space, Calculator Core, and Seri Neverclear. Oh, how far this community has come. Keep in mind that every single level in the top 10 at the time had been beaten on at least 240Hz. They had all been beaten on lower refresh rate, and so they could have absolutely restricted the community and made it so everyone had to play on 240. Keep in mind, back in March of 2021, a year after we found out about the physics change, Tartarus had been beaten on 240 by Cobra Blitz. Not only that, but Localizer, the person who wrote the Twitter document in and of itself, beat it on 288 FPS. Well, at least I assume. Assuming I'm not misunderstanding the description of the video, which, maybe. But it seems like Localizer was able to beat this on 288, which, well, that's not 240, it's also not 360. And also, at the bottom of his description, he says his best runs were 144 Hz, 52%, 23 to 78, and 46 to 100. He got some insane progress on 144 Hz. And he says, I doubt I'll ever have the time or motivation to attempt this again on 144, but it's definitely doable. Meaning, back then, people were saying Tartarus could actually be beaten on 144. I don't know if it ever was, but the point is that it could have been. So you might be wondering, why are you talking about this now as if it affects the argument? Well, the point I have is that all the shit that's on the demon list now that people are saying is only doable on 360, people chose to verify and get these levels rated despite knowing that the physics change would make these levels impossible and screw them over. I want to talk more about this idea that somehow by rating these levels and ranking victors on the leaderboards, RobTop is endorsing 360. The logic these people have is that by rating levels that were verified on 360, RobTop is endorsing 360 as a thing that you can play on. The problem I have with this is that it is very clear analyzing the rate standards that RobTop does not rate levels based off of their verification. He will take into account whether or not it was verified at all, but as long as a level is verified, he will rate it based off of the contents of the level. And the reason this matters is because every single level on the list is possible on 60, and the ones that are not possible on 60 are usually not possible on 60 due to bugs and not intentional design, and that doesn't necessarily make the level any harder, thinking of stuff like Devil Vortex. Doable? Probably not. I don't think anyone's ever going to beat Avernus on 60, but it's worth pointing out, here is a macro of Avernus running at 60 Hz. Now, again, I want to emphasize, I'm not saying Avernus is possible on 60 from a player logistics standpoint. This level, when I bought it, I had to realign frames. Yeah, Avernus has frame alignment on 60. However, despite how ridiculous it is, this level is still 100% possible on 60. The same thing goes for a majority of levels on the list. Now, does that mean all levels are possible on 60 on the list? No. In fact, Devil Vortex, if I'm not mistaken, is only possible on 144. My point is that by rating these levels, RobTop is not endorsing 360. He's endorsing 60, because all of these levels are possible on 60. Again, does that mean anyone will do them? No, that's absurd and is just unrealistic to expect. But this logic of the verification process is being endorsed by a level's rate is very flawed when you realize there are several levels that were hack verified that never got unrated. A Thanatos was hacked when it was released, and that's still rated. Does that mean RobTop endorses hacking? No. At the end of the day, despite the demon list saying no, if you verified a level on 1000 FPS, there was genuinely a chance that RobTop would rate that. And does that mean RobTop endorses that? And does that mean you should play on 1000 FPS? No, you definitely shouldn't. But the point is that you could. This community, by choosing to make all of their verifications 360 Hz, and by making it so that all the levels are basically impossible on 144 or 240, they have handicapped themselves. I, at the end of the day, think this controversy is really, really stupid, and the only people this is going to negatively affect are people that are way too high into the 1% for it to matter. It is a ridiculously small group of people who this is going to affect, and even then, you're telling me that a player like Zoink can't just adapt and play their levels on 240? I want to be clear and say that it's perfectly okay if you're disappointed with the choice that was made with the physics. If you want the game to be on 360 TPS and it's being on 240, yeah, I could see how that'd be a little disappointing. However, to act like this is a deal breaker that ruins the update, or especially to act like RobTop is doing something wrong by doing this, is just flawed logic and bad. At the end of the day, games update, and sometimes those updates break things. Compare this to the world of speedrunning. Look at how many times a speedrun based around a game that still gets updated has had their strat completely break via an update. You know what I mean? Like, maybe a speedrun relies on a specific glitch, and then an update patches that glitch. And so the speedrun can no longer use that glitch anymore. Usually what speedrunning communities do is they do one or two things. They either play on an old version of the game, or they just create a new strat that works around this problem. This by no means should be considered a deal breaker. I've unironically seen people say that they plan on developing mods to allow you to bypass the TPS and use 360 anyway. And the problem with that is that if you do that 2.2 onwards, you will be cheating. Because unlike the current state of the game where 360 is possible with legitimate hardware and no mods, in 2.2 it won't be. So if you bypass to 360, you are doing something that the game was not designed to do. You are altering the physics for an advantage to the player, and therefore you are cheating. That'd be like if someone developed a mod for Mega Hack that changes the ship physics to function like they did in 1.9. Those are not the game's current physics, and so therefore if you play on those physics, you're not playing legitimately. The only way to do that legitimately is to play on the 1.9 private server, which, yeah, there's no issue with doing that. It'd honestly even be kind of hard to justify playing on older updates of the game. With the exception of private servers, which you could probably get away with, it's kind of a weird situation because GD is designed in which if you play on an older update, you can't access the servers, meaning you're not supposed to be playing older versions of the game, so yeah, I don't really know how that would work. But altering the physics is not a solution. We just need to move forward as a community and adapt to the new physics. And while it might kind of suck for these small groups of top players, I doubt that the majority of the player base will be affected by this. Going back to Localizer's post, one of my least favorite things about it is that it mistakes preference to necessity. Basically, Localizer can't tell the difference between things people want and things people need in this document. For example, we get this quote: "A common misconception that has been repeatedly brought up in favor of the physics change is that it will only affect a small majority of the community. Nepesta recently hosted a poll on his YouTube channel asking if players use 360 or not, and 30% of people answered yes. The poll has 22,000 votes, so this equates to 6,000 players. 22,000 players may be a small sample size when you consider how large the community is, but 30% is still a significant percentage and should definitely be taken into consideration. I believe that there are far more 360Hz players being affected by this change than anyone anticipates." The problem with this is that it doesn't actually specify why people play 360. Nepesta holding a community post on YouTube asking, "Hey, do you play on 360?" doesn't ask, "Why do you play on 360?" And a majority of these people play on 360 because they like it. Now, me personally, I play on 240, so this isn't necessarily the same thing. However, just to give you an idea, I don't play on 240 for the advantage. I play on it because 60 hertz hurts my eyes. If I was forced to play on 60, I absolutely would and could. A majority of the people who have responded to Nepesta's community post saying that they play on 360 might honestly just be casual players who are doing it because of the preference. I doubt every single one of the people who responded saying they play on 360 have beaten a demon on the list, let alone something in the top 10 where it matters. But yeah, at the end of the day, I see this drama as really stupid. I think that the physics change is not going to be anywhere near as big of a deal as people are making it out to be, and at the end of the day, the people it affects are a very small 1% of the community. I doubt you as a viewer will be affected by the physics change, and I'm sure that you will still enjoy the game. And if you don't, it's probably going to be to something you don't like in the update rather than the physics change. All that being said, thank you for watching, and that's the end of this video.